Shadows lengthen across an icy canyon, the wind whispers through ancient stones, and a lone Neanderthal presses his palm against the cold earth, so close to home, yet so far from any path ever walked before. He stepped beyond Europe's edges, he crossed terrains only whispered about in clan stories. And he entered a land of endless permafrost, where survival demanded more than brute strength. It required persistence, it required adaptation, it demanded a spirit that refused to turn back. This wasn't a flight, it wasn't exile, it was exploration. A passage not driven by conquest but by necessity, curiosity, and the pull of landscapes unknown. Yet history almost forgot them. Their footprints dissolved in ice. Their stories vanished behind millennia of frost. Until now. This is the untold saga of the Neanderthals who reached Siberia, who thrived at the world's edge, and then disappeared without warning, leaving a silence that modern science is only just beginning to break. Long before maps carved borders into the earth, before written words carried memory across generations, there were footsteps pressed into the soil, temporary, fading, but undeniable. They belonged to the Neanderthals, a species born not in legend, but in the struggle for survival. They rose from the bones of Homo heidelbergensis, shaped by ice and scarcity, fire and instinct. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals were among the most resilient beings on the planet. They were not the brutish cavemen of old myths, nor the silent, hunched caricatures in outdated textbooks. They were human. Different, yes, but human. And they thrived in a world that asked more of them than it ever asked of us. The earliest Neanderthals emerged in Europe more than 400,000 years ago. Their skulls were thick, their limbs powerful, their bodies short and stocky, adapted perfectly for life in Ice Age climates. While Homo sapiens would evolve in the warmer cradle of Africa, Neanderthals were molded by glaciers and blizzards. They learned to master the cold, not avoid it. They became hunters of megafauna. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, massive deer. They crafted complex tools, buried their dead, and perhaps even mourned them. In places like Cima de los Huesos in Spain and La Chapelle aux Saints in France, archaeologists unearthed remains that told not just of death, but of lives lived with intelligence, intention, and care. But Neanderthals were not content to remain in one place. Like the rivers they followed and the herds they hunted, they moved. Slowly, over generations, they expanded eastward. While much of the spotlight shines on Western Europe, fossil traces tell a deeper, wider story, one of migration, adaptation, and curiosity. From France to Germany, into the Carpathians, and across the Central Asian steppes, Neanderthals pushed against the boundaries of their known world. And eventually, they reached Siberia. This migration wasn't fast. It didn't happen in a single lifetime. It was a slow, generational expansion, each clan moving a little farther, following game trails, seeking new hunting grounds, adjusting to unfamiliar terrains. The Ice Age was not one unbroken stretch of frost, but a pattern of glacial advances and retreats. During warmer interglacial periods, Neanderthals may have found the eastern forests and valleys rich with prey. The Altai Mountains, with their cave systems and protected slopes, offered shelter from the elements and vantage points for survival. The presence of Neanderthals in Siberia challenges many assumptions about who they were and what they were capable of. The discovery of their remains in caves like Chagyrskaya and Okladnikov shocked the scientific world. These were not stragglers. They were not accidental wanderers. They were established populations, organized, intelligent, and fully capable of surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And they got there long before Homo sapiens ever set foot in the region. How did they survive the trek? How did they endure such bitter landscapes? The answer lies in their unmatched adaptability. Neanderthals were masters of local resources. They shaped stone tools specifically suited to their environments. In the Altai, they created weapons optimized for close-range hunting in dense forests. They wore hides, likely processed with stone scrapers. They used fire to cook, to stay warm, to guard against predators. Their toolkits included awls, scrapers, and finely crafted Levallois flakes, technologies requiring planning, memory, and cooperation. But more than their tools, it was their social structure that allowed them to thrive. Neanderthals lived in groups, not massive tribes, but tightly knit bands of perhaps 10 to 30 individuals. Within these groups, knowledge was shared. Children learned by watching, mimicking, being guided. Injured members were cared for. Old individuals, even those with disabilities, often lived long enough to show signs of healing. These were not cold, calculating survivors. They were compassionate, bonded, emotionally aware beings. Their eastward migration also raises profound questions about their motivations. Was it necessity, competition for resources, the search for new hunting grounds, or was it something else, an ancient echo of the same drive that sent Homo sapiens across oceans and onto the moon, a pull toward the unknown? Whatever the answer, by the time modern humans began stepping out of Africa, Neanderthals had already claimed vast stretches of Eurasia. They were seasoned travelers, expert survivors, and guardians of forgotten frontiers. The Siberian chapter of their story was not a footnote. It was a centerpiece, a testament to their endurance, intelligence, and humanity. And it was only the beginning. For in the cold shadows of the Altai Mountains, the Neanderthals didn't just survive. They built something extraordinary, a life at the edge of the possible, a presence that would one day vanish beneath the snow, waiting millennia to be rediscovered. This is their story, the migration that history almost forgot. The path from Western Europe to the Siberian wilderness is not just a stretch of land, it's a corridor of deep time. Between the limestone cliffs of France and the icy winds of the Altai Mountains lies a journey measured not in miles but in generations. It is one of the great unsung sagas of human migration, not marked by cities or civilizations, but by hidden caves, sharpened stones, and quiet footsteps left in the snow. By the time Neanderthals began their eastward drift, Europe was already a land of seasonal hardship. The shifting climate of the Pleistocene brought intervals of warmth and brutal cold. Forests waxed and waned. Glaciers advanced, then retreated. Game moved with the seasons, and so did the people who hunted them. But as they pressed further into the unknown, beyond the Carpathians, across the open steppe, something remarkable occurred. The Neanderthals didn't turn back. They adapted. Unlike Homo sapiens, whose great expansions would be defined by bursts of rapid migration, Neanderthals moved slowly. Their progress was deliberate, methodical, and it had to be. Each new region presented different predators, prey, and vegetation. But through careful observation and cultural learning, they adjusted their toolkits, reshaped their strategies, and passed along vital survival knowledge. Their push into Central Asia would have taken them through what is now Ukraine, the southern reaches of Russia, and the open plains of Kazakhstan. These landscapes were vast, often treeless, dominated by winds and grasslands and temperature extremes. But they were also home to herds of steppe bison, horses, mammoths, and woolly rhinoceroses. Where prey went, Neanderthals followed, sometimes driving animals into natural traps, sometimes ambushing from brush or ravines. Archaeological sites like Chagyrskaya cave in the Caucasus and Denisova cave in the Altai reveal much about their stops along the way. By the time they reached the Altai Mountains, a rugged, forested range straddling the borders of modern Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China, they had become true masters of adaptation. The caves of Chagyrskaya and Okladnikov would become critical to our understanding of their lives in the East. These were not temporary camps. These were seasonal homes, bases of operation, shelters from the wind, from the ice, from the passing of time. Inside these caves, archaeologists found stone tools strikingly similar to those used by Neanderthals in Europe, particularly in the Mikokian tradition. This suggests cultural continuity across great distances, or perhaps the spread of ideas and techniques from clan to clan. The lithic technology was sophisticated. Bifacial tools, scrapers, notched pieces, all adapted to process hides, butcher meat, and workwood. Some tools were made from raw materials sourced over 100 kilometers away, indicating a broad knowledge of the land and movement between regions. And yet in these same layers of earth, researchers found something else. Signs of other humans. Denisovans, a mysterious cousin species, identified not through full skeletons, but through fragments, a pinky bone, a tooth, a sliver of jaw. Their DNA, however, would open a floodgate of revelations. At Denisova Cave, both Neanderthal and Denisovan remains were found in overlapping layers, and in one astonishing case, a teenage girl, known as Denisova 11, was revealed through genomic testing to be a first-generation hybrid. Her mother was Neanderthal, her father was Denisovan. This wasn't just coexistence, it was connection. The fact that Neanderthals had interbred with another archaic human species deep in Siberia shatters the outdated myth that they were isolated, incapable of integration. It shows that far from being evolutionary dead ends, they were part of a complex web of ancient humanity, one that included interaction, exchange, and shared bloodlines. This interbreeding event may not have been unique. The Altai region appears to have been a crossroads, not just of geography, but of genes and ideas. And it raises profound questions. Were there shared languages? Rituals, alliances? What did they call each other? Did they hunt together, trade, fight? The archaeological layers hint at long-term occupation. Burned bones suggest repeated fire use. Hearths hint at family structures. The spatial organization of artifacts suggests designated areas for specific tasks: sleeping, food processing, tool repair. This was not chaos, it was culture. But to live in Siberia meant more than knowledge. It required resilience. Winters in the Altai could plunge below -30 degrees Celsius. Snow blanketed the ground for months. Resources thinned. And yet the Neanderthals endured. They may have tailored clothing from animal hides, layered with fur and bound with sinew. Their fires were likely central to camp life, providing not just heat but community. They would have sat together in the flickering light, sharing warmth, stories, and silence. And what stories they must have carried, of hunts gone wrong, of rivers crossed, of children born, of stars that returned with the seasons. These tales were never written down. They were passed through gesture, through rhythm, through memory. The Eastern journey wasn't just physical, it was generational, emotional, and deeply human. By the time Homo sapiens entered the region tens of thousands of years later, Neanderthals had already made it home. They had mapped its terrain in memory, etched its dangers into story, left behind tools, ashes, and bones, markers of lives lived not on the fringe, but at the center of their own world. The journey from Europe to the Altai was no accident. It was a triumph, a migration not of desperation, but of intelligence and adaptability. A forgotten epic, now being rewritten in caves, in stone, and in strands of ancient DNA. And it leads us deeper still, into a past we're only just beginning to understand. In the ancient shadows of the Altai Mountains, beneath stone overhangs and frost-bitten cliffs, the Neanderthals carved out a world of endurance. It wasn't a world of monuments or cities. It was a world built from fire and bone, from repetition and memory. Life in Siberia did not permit weakness. Yet somehow in this brutal theater of cold and scarcity, Neanderthals not only survived, they thrived. Each year brought familiar rhythms, the thawing of the rivers, the migration of herd animals, the gathering of roots, berries and firewood in late summer, the sharpening of tools, the patching of hides. Winter was never far away. It pressed in even during times of relative warmth, reminding the Neanderthals that survival was a full-time job. They relied on the land and knew its secrets. They understood where the bison crossed in early spring, where wild horses gathered near watering holes, where mammoths followed frozen trails, their deep prints pressed into the tundra like ancient runes. And when the prey came, the Neanderthals were ready. Their hunts were organized and deliberate. They set ambushes. They coordinated drives. Their spears were strong, often crafted from local wood, tipped with sharpened stone and perhaps even hardened by fire. Inside their caves, daily life revolved around the hearth. Not just a source of heat, it was the center of learning and culture. Children sat in its glow, watching adults shape tools, tan hides, cook meat. Theirs was a knowledge not passed down in books, but in action, repetition, correction, and shared experience. Language, though not like ours, was likely present in some form. In gestures, vocal tones, even proto-words passed down like flint knapping techniques or hunting lore. The archaeological record paints a picture of purpose and structure. Bones scattered in deliberate patterns, hearths reused across generations, tools placed carefully, not discarded carelessly. Some caves show evidence of long-term use, with with layers of ash marking dozens of separate occupations. Neanderthals weren't just passing through, they were returning, season after season, building familiarity into the very landscape. But there were dangers everywhere: predators, injuries, starvation, disease. For every successful hunt there were failures. For every warm fire, a cold night survived without one. Their bones tell the story: fractured arms, worn down teeth, arthritis in joints, and yet they lived long lives, far longer than one might expect for people in such a harsh place. Why? Because they took care of each other. This is perhaps the most extraordinary revelation of life in the Altai. Evidence of healing, of survival after trauma, of individuals with disabilities who lived well into adulthood. They weren't abandoned, they were protected, federal, valued. This wasn't merely instinct, it was compassion, and they were not alone. Around them, the land pulsed with life. Wolves, cave lions, hyenas, massive elk, and saber-toothed cats. The Neanderthals lived among these creatures, competed with them, sometimes hunted them, but they also learned from them. Tracks in snow, animal behavior, patterns of movement. Their world was a living textbook, and they read it with sharp eyes and quiet patience. Their tools evolved too. In the Altai, tool assemblages show refinement and innovation. There were scraper tools with reworked edges, specialized flakes used for butchering, and tools likely used to process hides for clothing. Some archaeologists believe they used bone or wood as soft hammers to better control the shape of stone flakes, a sign of not only technical skill, but forward planning. The use of ochre, natural pigments, is also reported in some sites, perhaps for hide processing, perhaps for symbolic use. We don't know for sure, but if Neanderthals in Siberia used color intentionally, it hints at something profound, a sense of identity, a need for meaning, or even a spark of early art. Their diet was diverse, meat-heavy, yes, reindeer, bison, ibex, but also including seasonal plants, nuts and berries when available. They likely gathered medicinal herbs and may have even used birch pitch, a sticky substance made by heating birch bark, for hafting tools or treating wounds. Every part of their existence was tied to the land. Shelter, food, tools, fire, all of it required effort, awareness, and memory. Nothing was wasted, nothing was random, and nothing about their survival was accidental. They faced loss too. The death of a group member meant the loss of knowledge, strength, and connection. Some sites suggest rudimentary burials, or at least careful treatment of the dead. Bodies placed away from the center of camp. Grave goods? Maybe. But even without them, the act of placing the dead with care tells us enough. This was not a mindless creature scraping by. This was a person, one who knew joy, fear, hunger, satisfaction, one who saw the stars and perhaps wondered where the herds went or what came after death, one who could be wounded, not just in body, but in heart. For years, Siberia was seen as a place too harsh for Neanderthal occupation. Now we know better. The Altai caves have rewritten that narrative. They show us a people who weren't just present, but thriving, who adapted with precision, moved with purpose, and lived with dignity. They hunted in silence, sat by firelight, and passed knowledge from hand to hand, voice to voice, generation to generation. Their footprints are still there, beneath the snow and stone. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear them. The soft strike of flint, the crackle of pine, the hush of wind echoing through the mouth of a cave that once held a world. This is the life they made. This is the world they claimed. And though their voices are gone, the story remains, waiting, still warm in the ashes, to be told again. In the cold caves of the Altai, the fires eventually went out. The tools were left untouched, the bones of prey scattered and weathered, and the Neanderthals, once masters of survival in Siberia, were gone. Their disappearance was not sudden. It wasn't marked by a war or a plague or a singular moment of extinction. It was gradual, drawn out across thousands of years, a fading echo in the deep silence of prehistory. But why? Why did a species that had endured for over 300,000 years across glaciers, droughts, and shifting ecosystems suddenly vanish? The answers are complex, layered, and still unfolding. But we know some things. And what we know reveals a story not of weakness, but of transition. One theory points to climate change. Around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, the climate in Eurasia began to fluctuate violently. Massive shifts in temperature reshaped the landscapes the Neanderthals relied upon. Forests retreated, grasslands dried, prey animals moved or declined. For a species so deeply tied to their environment, these changes may have been devastating. Another theory, perhaps more compelling, centers on competition. Around the same time that Neanderthals began to fade, Homo sapiens arrived. From Africa, a new kind of human entered the scene. Slightly more slender, perhaps more flexible in social organization, with different tools and strategies. They spread rapidly, and in some places they encountered the Neanderthals. The encounters were not always hostile. We know this because our DNA remembers them. Every person alive today with non-African ancestry carries fragments of Neanderthal DNA, remnants of ancient unions, alliances, relationships. But there may have been competition too, over resources, territory, survival. And in that slow competition, Homo sapiens may have simply been better suited to adapt. Neanderthals were incredibly intelligent, but their groups may have been smaller, their trade networks more limited, their symbolic culture less developed. In an age where ideas spread faster than ever before, Homo sapiens may have thrived by sharing knowledge more widely, coordinating across greater distances, building myths and systems that linked individuals into larger tribes. Yet even in their disappearance, Neanderthals left traces far beyond their time. In the Altai, their DNA was not lost. It entered the bloodstream of humanity. In some cases, modern populations in Asia carry up to 2% of Neanderthal genes. Genes linked to the immune system, to skin adaptation, even to aspects of metabolism and behavior. And the landscape itself carries their memory. The caves remain. The tools lie buried but intact. Their fingerprints, though faded, can still be found pressed into the soft clay of hearth floors. The bones of their prey still bear the marks of butchery. And the stones they shaped still gleam when struck by light. Their legacy, though silent, is profound. They taught us that humanity is not defined by dominance, but by endurance. That intelligence comes in many forms, some quiet, some forgotten. That compassion can live in a world without writing or cities. That a spark held through winter is as powerful as a monument. In every sense, the Neanderthals of Siberia were explorers. They crossed into lands no human had ever touched. They built lives at the edge of the habitable world. They did not leave behind empires, but they left behind evidence of survival, of adaptation, of soul. And perhaps their greatest legacy is this. They remind us that our story is not a straight line. It is a web, a constellation of beings who shared the earth, shared ideas, shared blood. Neanderthals were not failures. They were part of the human journey, part of us. So why did they vanish? Perhaps they didn't. Not entirely. They live on in us, in our cells, our memories, our curiosity. And in the quiet corners of the Altai, where the wind still howls through stone passages and firelight once danced on walls, their presence lingers. The migration they made wasn't forgotten. It was waiting. And now it has been remembered. This was the story of the Siberian Neanderthals, a story not of extinction, but of endurance, not of endings, but of echoes. And those echoes still speak. We stand today on the edge of a world they once called home, a world of frost-bitten valleys, smoke-darkened caves, and ancient winds whispering across the Altai. The story of the Siberian Neanderthals is not just one of disappearance. It is a story of persistence, courage, and quiet genius. Their fires have long gone cold, Their footprints are buried beneath layers of time, but their presence lingers in our blood, in our bones, and in the questions we still ask. They were not a failed experiment. They were a chapter of us, a people who crossed the impossible, who shaped their world with stone and fire, who lived, loved, and remembered just as we do. Their extinction wasn't a dramatic end. It was a slow fading, like the last embers of a hearth fire. Yet even now, millennia later, those embers still glow. In our DNA, in our curiosity, in every tool unearthed, every cave studied, every story retold. So if this journey moved you, let it live on. Share it, speak of it, pass it forward. Leave your thoughts, your wonder, your voice, because the past isn't truly gone unless we forget. And the Neanderthals, the ones who dared to walk into Siberia's wild unknown, deserve to be remembered, not as a mystery, not as a myth, but as the ancestors they truly were. Their story does not end in silence. It ends in us.